so your personal statement should also kind of tell your story. It should give context, and it should kind of state your values, interests, and goals without explicitly saying, you know, my values are, my goals are, but like through kind of the way you write, those will kind of be evident.
Right, and just kind of echoing off of that, the personal statement should breathe life into your application, and make the committee feel something. So what we kind of mean by this is it gives context and some emotional weight to the activities that you took part in. You know, did you volunteer somewhere that really changed the way you think about the world, or did a specific event lead you to taking part in some sort of activity? Those sort of things that really give context to the things that are going to be on your application. Right, so here's the general structure of a personal statement. If you've written like any sort of essay, it's kind of the same formula. So you're going to start with an intro, and this will set up your personal statement thematically, narratively. There should be a really engaging hook to really grab the reader's attention, keep them engaged throughout the rest of your essay. And the main body, this is the meat, so to speak, of your essay. This should be where you place your evidence for why this chosen healthcare profession is right for you and why you'd be a good candidate for, you know, whatever school that you end up applying to. And this should be consistent. It's really important to make sure those activities match with your why. We'll go into more of that throughout the presentation. And then your conclusion. So this should summarize the main points that were in your main body in your introduction, and should reemphasize all your strengths that make you a really good applicant for professional school, sort of restating your thesis, as it were. All right, so we're going to go over some do's. These are things that you want to include in your personal statement that'll really make it pop, so to speak, really separate good from great personal statements. So the first one I'm going to talk about is building a narrative. So with the personal statement, you are effectively telling a story. It can seem a little weird because you're talking about yourself, but in essence, you're painting a portrait about your experiences to express why you want to go into insert healthcare profession here. There should be a narrative structure to your personal statement. For you, this could mean a series of anecdotes that sort of have the same theme, that talk about, you know, how these experiences sort of changed or shaped the way that you see things and why you want to go into whatever healthcare profession you want, or should be a like legitimate story with like an introduction, a rising action, climax, and conclusion. So then moving on to some examples.
Yeah, so what we did here was we took some examples from past personal statements, and we just kind of listed them out so that you can get a better feel for what all of this means. So Hanan talked a little bit about what building a narrative means, and now you can kind of correlate that to an example. So without actually reading it, the first two kind of describe kind of, you know, how that person, how that author kind of built a story, and so those are just two examples that you can take a look at to kind of, so that you can see what this really means.
Yeah, and similarly with the last example, the author sort of talked about how art, chemistry, and their grandmother really led them to want to pursue dentistry. So I kind of just took parts of their personal statement that sort of all fit that theme. I thought it really meshed well together. So yeah, this is just an example of how you can try to build a narrative in your essay.
So the next theme that we have as a do is self-reflection. And so what that kind of means is really sitting down and considering, you know, why you're interested in this specific health profession, what experiences have contributed to your decision. And, you know, since you're going to start writing the personal statement, that kind of already shows that you've made the decision to apply, that you've already done some self-reflection, and you kind of know, you know, that you're definitely, you know, that you've made this decision already. But what you have to kind of do for the personal statement is then kind of think about, so what specific experiences can you use? Also the quality of your application. You know, you want your personal statement to really be a reflection of who you are. You want it to, without explicitly stating, again, like, these are my values, kind of show your values, show your goals, show your intentions, and what you kind of want, what you want to do when you enter the professional world. And so really sitting down and taking time to reflect on your journey and then put that into writing is kind of what we have, is why we chose the theme of self-reflection. And so we included some quotes that have kind of helped with that. And so the first one talks a little bit about how the specific author used or talked a lot about their experience with art and how that kind of will help them later on, and how they've kind of used art to look at medicine and surgery, or not look at, sorry, but kind of that's helped them pursue and be interested in medicine and surgery. And the second quote kind of also talks about that. It's that they've taken this specific example, so Jared's transplant day, and then it's taught them all these different values that you see that they've listed. And so they've really done some, it's clear that they've done some self-reflection.
Right. And then similarly, this last quote, just like Amelia said, I think this last quote shows that the author was really able to self-reflect and really self-assess about how their experiences sort of coalesced into a recognition of where they want to be and what they want to do later on in healthcare. Okay, so then moving on to intentional word choice and being concise. I think this is a really important aspect of the personal statement to just think about. Having good word choice can really elevate the tone of your personal statement and convey a lot of meaning and a lot of emotions, and can help make your writing really unique when comparing to other applicants in the pool. It doesn't have to be like super deep or anything. Like the difference between using said and spoke, that's fairly negligible. But when you're thinking about saying something like, this interested me, this captivated me, this enthralled me, like those sort of things really convey a certain tone. And depending on what sort of tone you're trying to strike, it could really make a big difference. But that's also not to say that's not an invitation to use a lot of flowery, unnecessary language. You want to be concise and intentional about the words you're using and making sure that you're using them for a specific purpose, whatever that may be. Okay, so then here, we're going to have a poll for this, but basically, one of these is a good example of being concise and using intentional word choice, and the other one has been edited to have not so great word choice. I'll let y'all sort of think about that for a second, or I'll just talk about it. So the one on the right is the one that's edited. And the reason that I think the one on the left is really good about using word choice and being concise is, well, one, it's like pretty short, but two, the thing that the author is describing is the death of a patient that they didn't really know super well. So I think having this barren, or not barren, but very non-superfluous paragraph sort of shows that they are a little separated from that experience, and that like they didn't really know the patient that well, versus the paragraph on the right that uses a lot of descriptive language, which could be seen as sort of intrusive in this really private personal event. And if we also want to think about the economy of writing the personal statement, you only have so many characters to work with, right? So having this really long paragraph that doesn't really convey a lot more information than the one on the left, that's not really a good use of the word count that you have. So you want to be really intentional about what words you're using and how you use them.
Yeah, so I just wrote in chat if people want to type. I mean, Hanan already explained about which paragraph they think is better, but I guess we've kind of moved past that. So the next theme is using your own voice. So this is really important because admissions committees are really looking into each applicant and kind of deciding whether they want to interview you or not. And so it's important to really, highlight your strengths and talk about you, because they want to see you as a person. And so using your own voice is kind of self-explanatory, but what Hanan kind of what Hanan touched on earlier, which is not using flowery language, not using language that you wouldn't use, if you were talking, but just kind of using language that, you're comfortable with and that you would usually use. And so if we move forward, some examples. So the first example I chose because this author used the phrase fair enough. And I thought that was interesting because, it might not be something you use, but the author thought that, to include that by including that, the admissions committees could kind of see, how they speak as a person and kind of their thoughts. And so that's an interesting way to go about it. If there are certain phrases or certain things you think would give admissions committees a glimpse into your personality, kind of how you talk, then that's certainly useful to add. And then the second quote kind of, again, talks about how this person self-reflected, because they talk about all their values, but also it kind of also shows how they speak or how they write. So that's important to, again, not stray away from who you really are and to put exactly how you talk, how you write into words.
Yeah, and like similar. Oh, no, I can just move on. It's fine. Um, or okay, so going back to these last two examples, I just found them to be very genuine and authentic, especially in the context of the overall essay. The things that these two separate people wrote, I found that they were pretty specific, and they are very specific to this person in that like only this person with this specific set of experiences could really say and get across. Yeah. All right, last one for the do's. So editing and proofreading. I'm going to be super honest. You might not get the personal statement right on the first try. It might take a lot of drafting and rewriting. I like to write in my free time, but writing about myself in this way was a little awkward for me. So I definitely had to get a lot of eyes on it and go through a lot of revisions. So it's important during the writing process to keep yourself accountable and make sure that you're thoroughly reading over everything, getting second, third, fourth opinions if you need to, avoiding any silly grammar mistakes. But also, be kind to yourself. This can be a really frustrating process. So take as many breaks as you need to when you're writing, step away from it for a few days, few weeks, whatever, whatever you need to get like a fresh mind and fresh set of eyes on it. So you're not sort of running around in circles, trying to fix something. I just wanted to add that a lot of the don'ts that we're going to go over in a little bit can be fixed with really good editing and proofreading.
Yeah, so thanks, Hanan and Amelia, for doing the do's. I'm going to shift gears and start talking about some of the don'ts. But before getting into that, like Hanan said, like my very first draft of my personal statement versus the one that I ended up actually submitting, like they were very different. Like maybe a few lines were the same, but that's kind of how it goes. It's going to be a process, and like you're going to have to rewrite and make a lot of changes, and that's part of it. And there's nothing wrong with that. So hopefully some of the tips can help you along that process. But okay, yeah, now getting into some things that should try to avoid or kind of be mindful of as you start writing your drafts. One of the like big ones to avoid are like using cliches or kind of just like broad generic language. The whole point of the personal statement is to kind of talk about what's unique to you and using these very like trite sayings and words that are and like that's just like stating like empty values without really much specific experiences or tangible anecdotes can kind of hurt you in the long run because it doesn't really set you apart from other applicants. You're going to be applying for whatever professional school you're applying to with probably like possibly similar motivations to a lot of the other applicants, but you want to convey those in and again a unique and personal way to you. So as we look at like some of the examples here, saying things like there's nothing else I'd rather do, I want to help as many people as possible, like X careers, the noblest thing I can do in my life. Like, yeah, everyone kind of has those realizations and is aware of that, but putting that in your personal statement, I think is it kind of hurts you because it again is like it's common for pretty much all of the applicants. So you want to not use these very like cliche and common phrases and take a step further and put your own personal experiences there. And then moving ahead to another don't is the narrative resume. So I'm not sure if you all are aware of this, but when you are applying, in addition to your personal statement, you will have like an experience section, and that's where you'll list I think like anywhere from like 10 to 15 experiences that were important to you, but that's kind of going to be more objective and you're just listing what you did. You don't want to do that again in the resume because that kind of is a waste and it just reiterates that in an essay format and doesn't really give admissions committees, something personal and extra about you. And it's just a waste of, all the characters. While there are going to be certain experiences that are more meaningful to you and are going to shape your narrative. Kind of picking and choosing which ones you do end up using in your essay is going to be very important, and shaping what's personal to you here. So keeping that in mind, here's some examples of kind of like things to avoid with that. Just kind of listing experiences kind of back to back, or not elaborating on them, doesn't really give the admissions committee anything extra than what's going to be in your application for the experience section. Here, just looking at this first one, where this person just like broadly says, oh, I like science, I have clinical experiences, and I have like medical illness, or like I have experience with people who have medical illness. Like that's kind of like it seems more like an essay instead of like a personal statement, and it's just like that kind of thesis is not really as personal. It's more like objective and like kind of like descriptive there, and then in like a very broad way. And then here, this one I think really highlights this idea of like a narrative resume, where this person says, I volunteered at a dental clinic, I spent a month in Kenya, and because of this, I learned about these values. Like that doesn't really give anything personal. Like how did this person gain these values? What happened at these experiences? And just throwing them in there in that kind of just like back-to-back order is kind of just like listing them. And again, isn't really like personal and unique to you. And so being mindful of how you present your experiences is very important as you start writing your personal statement. And so that kind of comes into telling and not telling without showing, which is something you should avoid. I think that like the way it should be is you should show without telling. Like I think this was mentioned in some of the do's. You want like your overall message and values to be interpreted from your writing, but it shouldn't you shouldn't present them in your writing, if that makes sense. Like when you're listing, one of your your takeaways, that should come from how you build up your narrative and how you describe your experiences, instead of just saying, like I like coming back to like using a cliche or using like a very like empty kind of like value statement. And that comes back to kind of like picking the right type of anecdotes you want to write about, and like kind of writing it from your personal perspective instead of like from an outside objective third person perspective. That makes sense. So looking at some of the examples here, these are examples where people kind of, they just said what happened, or what their experiences were, but they didn't really like, again, take it that step further. As this person here is just describing a procedure they witnessed, they said, this one is very unique and it stood out to me, and stayed with me to this day. Like that's very like broad, that's very empty, that's kind of vague. And while that may be true to that person, the fact they're just telling that doesn't really help the admissions committee kind of like see what your experience was in a more tangible and like concrete way. And then here too, right, this person here says just being in a hospital, they has allowed them to like demonstrate that they can work at a high level and not get overwhelmed and essentially be comfortable. Like that's, again, it's very just like kind of empty, and there's not really anything personal to these few lines here. So just again, being mindful of how you set up what you want your takeaway to be is very important, in a way that you want it to be more creative instead of just descriptive. And so that comes into kind of like how you pick your anecdotes. You do, again, like with experiences and whatever maybe personal hardships you may have endured, or things that have essentially drove you to pursue the career you want. Thinking about your ultimate like why first, and like starting broad, I think helps pick like what specific things you do want to elaborate on, because I think like starting from like what are you writing about, and like what's your overall message, I think helps narrow down what specific things like you want to tie in. And when you think about what anecdotes you want to pick and what your themes you want them to like elaborate upon, they should kind of connect in a way that has like a flow. It kind of makes sense as you're adding certain experiences. Like you want to think about what does this contribute to the specific paragraph I'm writing about, and essentially the overall flow of the essay. And kind of just throwing in not like tangential experiences or points kind of like ruins the flow, and it makes it kind of choppy and hard to read. And so when you're thinking about what you want to include, you want to again like tie into the bigger picture. And so like here, like a few examples of anecdotes that were thrown in that kind of didn't really contribute much to the overall essay, and like in my opinion, like it could have gone without. Like here, this person talks about how they am fluent in Spanish and they took a trip to like El Salvador, and that was like pretty much the extent of the anecdote this person threw, and there wasn't anything after that that elaborated more upon it. And so again, it doesn't really add much to what this person's saying. And then here, this is like a combination of like an anecdote that was kind of weak, and also just like very like cliche, like just saying I absolutely love learning, and then here's an example, like that kind of setup is a little weaker, and kind of like being mindful of how you want to like frame your anecdotes. And again, the ones you pick are very important for crafting your personal statement. And then last one, not really any like tangible examples here, but you know, in your personal statements, you are going to be using, you know, some creative language, and it's okay to use metaphors and be hyperbolic in some ways, but again, you want it to kind of express your genuine experiences, and you know, you want it to convey what your personal story is, but you also want it to be like honest and true. So as you're, you know, picking your experiences and as you're writing, make sure it does reflect things in a very like, again, in a way that's real and not, you know, you're not lying, which again, I don't really expect anyone here to do that, but just be mindful of how you are phrasing and wording your things. So if I'm not mistaken, that's our last don't for today, and that'll bring us home.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sri. Yeah, so right now we can sort of open it up to any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or throw anything into the chat, and we can try to answer as best we can.
I had a question.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how did you guys find the line between including enough information about yourself and like making sure that you were including everything you should include, but also sticking in the word count? Like, how much do you actually talk about each of your experiences?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'm someone who like I struggle a lot with being concise. I like really worked, like I really have to work to meet the word count. So I think the way that I try to go about it was I like really did a lot of self-reflection and thinking about like how, like what activities really meant the most to me with regard to like my journey to be a professional healthcare professional. Yeah, so really just thinking about what is like the most significant to your story is how I would try to delineate between including too much and including too little. Amelia, Shri.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of echo that, also like a question that came up in the chat was like knowing what word count. It depends on kind of what specific like application cycle it is and like what career, because I think like AMCAS for med school, like everyone I think except like the Texas system is like 5,300 characters, and I think it's same for dental. So like you'll kind of know what your character limit is going in. But as far as like, you know, picking like how much to write, that kind of comes down to like knowing what experiences you want to talk about beforehand, because like if you kind of are trying to like add in things as you go along, that's where you can maybe run into errors about or run into issues with like maybe not having enough space to elaborate on something, or you know, taking too much time on one thing and not a lot on the other. So like picking like specific things that are relevant to what your overall message is, but not talking about, you know, all your experiences. You don't need to hit that like you don't need to hit everything that you've done. You just need to hit the things that I think are most formative for your personal statements. And you may leave out things that have, you know, helped you with coming to medicine, but that's totally okay, because like, but you want the things that I think are going to really fit in with your message.
Yeah, and I just want to add, one last thing, which is that like on your application as well, there'll be a section where you talk about your experiences, and then you choose 3 of them to kind of talk more about them. And so that's also interesting to note, because you don't, you know, want to copy that essay where you talk about those 3 meaningful ones again and put that into your personal statement. So it's kind of hard because you do have all these experiences, but kind of narrowing down which ones are the most important. How can I not state the same exact thing, you know, twice, because you definitely don't want to do that. But yeah, kind of what you talked about, a blend of your experiences, how they've affected you, but also copying the experiences section.
And just the last point, like, you know, hopefully like after like the application phase, like you're going to go to interviews where you can also talk at length about like some of your experiences that meant a lot to you. So they'll still be like taken into account if like that's what you're worried about.
Okay, so I have a question in the chat. I'm going to read aloud to everybody. So there's a question about like if you do want to talk about, you know, a few experiences or events in your life, like one of the examples that was shown in the do section was how this person kind of integrated an experience with like talking about their grandma, and I think like some of their experiences with like, I think it was chemistry or science, and then lastly like art. So like how would you want to connect those, and like how do you prevent that kind of thing from being more of a list and kind of making it more like integrative?
I was gonna say, I think that's where the story building, kind of the narrative comes in, because again, like your experiences section has like a lot of times has a lot of the information about like, you know, how many hours or this and that. You definitely don't want to state that, but rather kind of how have all of these experiences, you know, built you into the person you are today, and led you to, you know, choose the decision to apply. I think for me, what I did was I thought about my experiences in a chronological order. And so some people kind of take it that route, and that's how they kind of, you know, write their personal statement. So that's a potential way to do it, is like, I talked a little bit about, you know, something that occurred or happened to me as a child and how that influenced my decision, and then throughout time, and ended it with, you know, today, these are all the experiences that have kind of culminated in this decision. So that's another option, is chronological order. I don't know if that kind of helps as a way to think about how to plan this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Like using chronological order. That definitely helped me a lot, and that's something I kind of use in mine as well. And so I think, yeah, that's a good way to like integrate in a way that makes sense.
I concur. I have another question in the chat. Could you talk more about when you started writing the personal statement? Is there a certain time period we should be finished with the personal statement by? So I'll just start off really quick. I know for composite letter stuff, you have to have, there's a set date for you to be done with it. I don't exactly know what it is. I think this last year it was like late January or so, but just check the composite letter application information for that exact date. And then I think they should send you your drafts February 1st. Okay, perfect.
I have a question. So if we're taking a gap year and we do the composite letter process this year, will we have to do it again?
I think you're encouraged to do the composite letter process when you're going into your cycle instead of doing it before your gap year cycle, or before your gap, excuse me.
Does that make sense?
Because I'm planning on taking a gap year, but I also have access to the application right now. So should I do that, or should I just wait until next year?
If you've made up your mind on taking a gap year, like the only way I'd say you should apply now for composite letter is if you're like not entirely sure if you want to take a gap year, but if you know for a fact like you're not going to be applying in this upcoming cycle, then you should apply for the composite letter while you're on your gap year.
So if I'm going to do the composite letter process next year, do I have to re-attend those 3 info sessions?
I want to say yes, but if you explain your situation to whoever your advisor is, I'm sure they'll make note of it. Like I think, yeah, told them that you've gone through it now, but you're gonna take a gap year, then like I'm sure they'll be understanding. But yeah, I'd reach out to whoever your advisor is there.
Yeah, I agree. But also getting back to the question, so yeah, the composite letter, they have a specific date for the personal statement to be done, and then those will get back to you sometime in the spring afterwards. And in the meantime, you can still like work on your personal statement if you want to. I know a lot of people who sent in like very rough drafts for the composite letter, and then they just kept editing it just because they needed to send something in. So I would suggest having like your personal statement like done, you know, right before you're about to apply, sometime in April or May, yeah, just before you're about to apply. But like you don't need to worry about like hard deadlines for right now, except for that composite letter date.
In my experience, I would say starting early is really important. Like I found the experiences section and the other sections kind of easier to write because I was like, okay, it's pretty direct. You just kind of talk about what you did. But for the personal statement, I don't know, I just like had so many different ideas and talked to a lot of different people on how to write it. So I just think that maybe focusing on that first, honestly, could be a good idea in terms of like all the different components.
Okay, so I have another question in the chat asking about kind of what's the purpose of having a personal statement for the composite letter process. I think that's a good question because for me, like my composite letter personal statement wasn't the one I ended up submitting. Like the one I submitted from the actual like med school cycle was, I think, a more like polished, finalized version. But like kind of what the point of it is, I think is like twofold. It's one, to help, you know, people in the PHA office know more about you and like help kind of like craft their composite letter. And two, kind of they give you feedback. So if you kind of have an idea of what you do want your overall thing to write about, or, you know, your overall personal statement to be in when you are going into like the application cycle, like, or when you are like submitting your apps in like, you know, May or whenever it opens. They'll be giving you feedback on that when you just submit it to the PHA office. So I think like it's a kind of like a structured way to have like critiques and have someone take a look at it.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it's good practice, honestly. Like writing is a skill. And I don't know, I took like a lot of like random science classes, so they didn't really ask me to write a whole lot. So getting used to like, yeah, how to form like cohesive paragraphs. Like, yeah, just having that practice is good. And getting used to talking about yourself in that way is also really good. Which is what I guess the whole process is for, the whole composite letter process is for. I see another question in the chat. Did you guys use any other resources on campus to help with editing and reviewing? So my roommate actually is in the writing center, so I definitely got her input a whole lot. And so using the writing center is definitely a really helpful resource. I believe they have something set up for pre-health students to really like work on their personal statements. I could be wrong on that, Shereen and Amelia. If I'm just talking, let me know. But
yeah, I'm not on top of my head. I'm not 100% sure. I know there is like personal statement / like narrative writing, like critique services either through the writing center or the career center. So if like, yeah, we can try. I don't know off the top of my head, unfortunately, and I can try and figure those out and send those out to whoever's interested. And I'll just like push it on the PHA like social media page. But also like this is like less like broad, but you know, using like your networks is a good place. Like for me, like I think I'm fortunate to have some friends who are currently in med school or have gone through the process. And so like having like eyes from people who kind of know what to expect or kind of are familiar with the process is you know, very helpful. And I mean that, and also like I think the people in the pre-health office are very welcoming in that sense as well. So yeah, like I think that's a good way to also get some that aren't necessarily as structured.
Yeah, I believe the writing center does have some connection. I believe you can utilize their help. I also wanted to add that your letter of recommenders could be a good option for who you send your personal statement to. For me, my letter of recommenders actually asked for my personal statement because they used that as a framework to, I guess, write their letter of recommendation for me. So definitely utilizing your professors as well, definitely the ones that know you, because they can, you know, tell if you're being genuine and they can give you, like, I think the best feedback.
I had a question. So I was just going to ask, I guess like up until now, we've kind of talked about like tangible experiences and like activities that we've done in college to write in your personal statement. But I was wondering if like that's expected or if you can kind of write more about like internal work that you've done, maybe like something that is more just like reflection during college over time rather than some actual activity.
that's a good question. I think it's perfectly fine to write about like that sort of like, yeah, internal work, as you said. Shows a lot of self-reflection on your part, which is something that they're really looking for. I think it's just also important to tie that to something tangible, like make it seem, in layman's terms, just make it seem not made up. Like really making it so like you have some sort of like real tangible connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just
go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say also, like, they're pretty flexible in terms of what you can and cannot add. Like, they're kind of no instructions, so you can take it, you know, as creatively as you'd like. So that's also important to know.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. Like at the end of the day, like the prompts, at least for the MCAT app, it's just why medicine. There's not, you know, why do you want to do this or what's something that has shaped your experience. It's that. So whatever you interpret that as, like, you know, we gave some tips today, but if you want to, you know, do something different or, you know, like it's like nonsense. It's whatever works best for you in that kind of way. So like I think tangibles and concretes are helpful against like kind of ground it, but if you do want to focus more on internal, like kind of potentially like abstract things, there's nothing like there's no right answer or no wrong answer, I should say.
Yeah, I'll just add that I'll just add that like a lot of like the good personal statements that I've read from like my friends have been like sort of abstract and like not exactly tangible and concrete, but even then just having like some examples of like stuff that you've done or like things you've thought about really ground the essay. I have another question in the chat. How much time in advance should we ask for letter of recommendations? I don't think I asked until like late in the fall / early in the spring. So sometime between like December, January, something like that.
Yeah, I think I used winter break as kind of like my time to like think about who I'm choosing and then sending those emails.
I have another one. Could you guys talk a little bit about how y'all went about starting your personal statements? That's a good question. So I guess my writing process is more just word vomiting on a Word doc, pretty much, just like thinking, okay, like why do I want to go into medicine? Just talking about like thinking about things that like interested me or what I thought would make an interesting personal statement and try connecting that to my why. So I really just had like a big brainstorming document and just really thought about like, I guess everything on my application or everything that I wanted to put in my application and try to tie them all together.
Yeah, I think like I always like this question. I like love and hate it at the same time. So I think it's like so hard to like, I can tell you what I did, but I don't think that's like, objectively right or wrong. Like even when I went through the process myself and I kind of was asking for advice, like seeing what, friends I had who had gone through it have done, it's like, well, that's not really me. Like I had a friend who wrote like 4 or 5 different versions of like four or five different personal statements that had like different contents altogether. And I was like, that's not me. Like, and so like kind of thinking about what I guess like like if you do have like one thing that's like your why, then that's dope. But if you do need to take time to like reflect and maybe, flesh out a few different things, that's also like, there's nothing wrong with that. And so like, I think like getting started, it's like kind of, it depends on, I guess, like where you're at with how you think about it. And if you need reflection, maybe that's something you should spend time on. If you don't, then you can kind of jump right into it.
Yeah, for me, it was like really hard to start writing it. I like often have like writer's block and can't just like produce essays right away. But I think one thing that helped me was kind of talking to like other people about it. I remember like I talked to my parents just about like my reasoning, and just kind of saying that out loud helped me like translate that into words later on. So I think just whatever it is for you to kind of start that process.
I have another question. How diverse do you think our recommenders could be? Would it work against us if they were all professors? This one, I think you want to think about 2 things. One, like, are these people who like really know you really well? Can they speak to like a lot of your like character as well as like whatever else? I guess they would talk about like your academic ability. But then you also want to think about like what schools you're applying to. I know certain schools want like, one science professor, one non-science professor, and maybe someone else who isn't a professor. So it really is kind of up to, what schools you're looking at and looking into like what they require. But really like the most important thing you want to think about is, do these people know you really well? Can they speak to a lot of your character? All right. If there are no more questions, oh wait, just kidding. One more just popped up. When should we know what schools you want to apply to? That is a good question. Because doesn't that impact the recommenders you ask? So I think like once you've taken like you have your GPA and you've taken insert standardized test here, that kind of gives you an idea of where you want to go. So I guess whenever you have those 2 stats, so to say, you can start looking at those schools. I don't think I started like really narrowing the list down or picking stuff until like April, May, like somewhere around there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, around April or May for me. Shree, I don't know if you have any other advice.
Yeah, I think like once I got my like standard, my like MCAT score back was when I was like, okay, this is the ballpark of schools that like, I may think I want to apply to. And then like thinking about other factors like, proximity, like, if you're trying to go in-state versus out-of-state, private, public, if there's specific programs or whatever that the schools have, like, I think like that's kind of like up to like, where you're at and up to you. So I think like, as far as like when that happened for me, like it was like halfway through the spring, like before applying. So I think like, in like February, March, I sat down, I was like, okay, let me figure out where I could potentially see myself going. And that's, I think like the advisors in the PH office kind of helped me go through that, because there's like this little like database called like MSARS through like the AMCAS, where they like list kind of like school profiles that you kind of like see where you fit in from both like a statistic perspective, as well as also like more like qualitative things that the schools offer. So yeah, I'd say like maybe a few months before, the application opens is probably a good time to start, like thinking about it, if that's possible for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to add, I guess this is sort of transitioned into general application questions. So if y'all needed to go or anything, like feel free, like you're not being held here or anything. I have another question. How many med schools do most people apply to? I've heard 20 to 50, but I wasn't sure. This is also like an up to you type thing. Yeah, I've heard most people apply to like mid-teens to like mid-20s. Definitely 50 is too much, I think. That's a lot of money and a lot of time writing secondaries and stuff.
Like these apps are,
they're a lot.
Money.
For sure. So yeah, I think anywhere between like the mid-teens and the mid-20s is normal. But I also know someone who applied to one med school and got in. So like it's really just up to you and like how many you want to apply to. Like, do all of those schools feel like a good fit for you? You don't want to like, waste your time, waste your money applying to somewhere that you don't want to go to. Just really thinking about, is this somewhere where I could fit in? Would be how I would make that list.
I got a question just about like the presentation. Someone asked where there'd be access to this. I'm not sure if everyone who's here today registered through the PHA like event calendar, because if you are, we'll have you guys' emails and we can send it out through that in a follow-up per se. But if not, I can I'll talk to like Anil, who works in like the PHA office, and maybe try to just like have a link to this somewhere on the website. Or if you want to like drop your email in the chat, I can forward this to you afterwards or something. So yeah, like kind of those avenues are probably like after this ends, I'll look into getting this out there to everybody, and at least in a place where you can access it on your own time. So if anyone had any questions about that.
I took a screenshot of everyone that's in this, so we have their names, so we can find their emails.
Our emails are also here in case like we miss you. Feel free to reach out in case you want like anything that we've talked about, like the recording or the presentation. And another question, when do the applications open? I really blocked out a lot of that from my brain.
Like, is the question about like I'm coming back to the AMCAS, that's the one I'm most familiar with, but like that, like the formal ones, is that, I'm assuming that's what that's asking. So I think like, I don't know how it'll be specifically like coming like in the middle of like a COVID year, how they're planning for the future. But I think like for this past cycle, it was like early May, I think, if I remember correctly. So you had like, it's when the primary app opens. And so I think like keeping up with those dates like well before even like the spring, or like before the late spring, is probably good. But you can always find those on like the specific websites for med school, dental school. Like even like if you're from Texas, like the Texas medical schools have their own little system. So like you can find those on the interwebs, but I think it's like late spring.
Yeah, and I think the PHA should like also advise all about like the timeline of applying and everything, like what those specific dates are. All right. Emily, did you have something to say?
Oh no, I was going to say, if there are like what you were just about to say, if there are any questions that you want to ask to just us, we can stick around for a little longer. But thank you guys for coming.
And I just want to also offer, like, my email's there, like, like I'm happy to help. Like, obviously, like, use it judiciously. I don't expect anyone to spam me, but like, if you do want to reach out on a personal level, maybe, like ask me a question about your statement as you're writing it, like, I'm more than happy to help, especially like over the break, because that's when I worked on mine the most. And this upcoming break, I don't have a lot going on. So at least for me, like, I don't want to like offer up necessarily Amelia and Hanan, but I'd be happy to help anybody like throughout this process if you have any specific questions along the way.
Yeah,
Me
no,
too.
I'm so down. Yeah.
Me too, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate the questions too. Like, I know we kind of ended like halfway through, but you guys also asked some great questions. So I hope this was helpful to you all. And good luck with the process, like with writing and eventually applying. I know you'll all be great, and hope some of the tips today help you guys along the way.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
I had a quick question, and you might not know the answer to this considering all of you are seniors and already applying without a gap year. But do you know, like, so I'm graduating this December,